When someone mentions trust issues, usually your first thought is somebody who has a hard time trusting other people. But what happens when you're too trusting? Usually the word for that would be gullible, but gullible sort of carries this connotation of foolishness, or you're trusting somebody who you obviously shouldn't. Today's case is going to be a situation where 3 different girls trusted a person who they had already believed that they could and should trust because they knew them. If you grew up in the early 2000s, you probably went to school assemblies where they talked about finding a trusted adult. And a lot of the times back then, probably less so now, an example of a trusted adult might be a parent of a friend. And today's case is a perfect example of why that is often very untrue. Hi guys, and welcome back to another spooky Saturday. Today we're gonna have a special guest. It's currently raining outside, so we have some ASMR. And we also have Neko, my new kitten. She is so cute. She's a snow Bengal. For anybody who's followed me for a long time, exactly a month ago, my cat, who was my first pet ever, whose name was Cat, who was a Bengal, a brown standard Bengal, died super suddenly and unexpectedly. She had like a kidney infection, so I took her to the doctors, and then the medication that they gave her caused like a blood clot, and she died even though she was getting better. So I was very devastated. I wasn't planning on getting another cat for a long time. And then I was on my way to my doctor's appointments with my fiance, and we went into a pet store because we got there early and it was right nearby, and the only cat that they had for sale was a white Bengal cat. What are the odds of that? And so I was like, dude, we gotta get that cat. That's like a sign. And Kylan was like, well, we gotta go to your doctor's appointment to get your blood test done, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, okay. We got to my doctor's appointment and the receptionist was wearing like a white cheetah sweater. And I was like, dude, it's a sign from the universe. We go back to the pet store after my doctor's appointment. She's still there. And my fiance plays for the Colts. And there's a car parked in front of the front door with a giant Colts like tire cover on it. And I was like, dude, it's a sign from the universe. I gotta get this cat. And so Kylan came up with the name for her of Neko, because our first cat's name was Cat, because she wouldn't respond to anything except for cat. And so since Neko is the Japanese word for cat, it's sort of a little homage to our first baby, because we feel like maybe she sent us our second baby. Don't worry, I'll take this bell off of her, but I just thought you guys might want to see the little butterfly on her collar. Before I do, she's so small, and we have so many little like cabinets in our house and stuff, I had to put a bell on her so that I would know where she is. But she'll be climbing around in the background of this episode. She purrs super loud, so if there's any background noise of her purring or like the rain, maybe it'll be like nice, comforting ASMR for you guys now that her bell is off. Many of you may have a vague memory of this case already. This case happened when I was in high school, and so I was aware of it. I remember when the case broke, but I didn't know the full details of the case until now. And when I was reading about it, I was truly horrified. As a part of my research process, there was a movie, well, there's several movies made about this case, reenactments, not documentaries. I'm just going to go ahead and say right now that I don't really recommend that you watch them unless you have a very, very strong stomach. The acting is good. I'm not saying that they're bad movies or anything like that. They're just very visceral, and it's not approached in the way that many true crime inspired movies are, where they sort of avoid showing things that are too traumatic, or they allude to them, or, you know, in an unethical sense, sometimes they try and make it look cool, which is worse because it's dishonest, but it is often less traumatic. And the movies about this case are not like that at all. They are very realistic. The acting is very realistic. It is an extremely tough watch. So if you find yourself wanting to know more about this case after we go over it today, I would just behoove you to stick to documentaries unless you want to see something or some things that will be very hard to unsee. Ariel Castro was born in Puerto Rico on July 10th in 1960. His parents got divorced shortly after his birth, and they both actually independently chose to immigrate to the United States of America, but they chose to go to two different locations. So his mom went to Pennsylvania with him, whereas his father and his half-siblings ended up going to Ohio. Eventually, his mom decided, for whatever reason, that she should relocate to Ohio as well. I would assume it's just to keep everybody closer together, but maybe there was another reason. They didn't go into a lot of detail on that. And so Ariel ended up graduating high school in 1979 from Lincoln West High School. After high school, he ended up meeting Grimilda Figueroa. And when I say after high school, I mean like very shortly after, essentially right after. She actually lived right across the street from him, so their paths quite literally crossed. And they fell in love very, very quickly. Things got very serious very quickly. They got married pretty fast. They ended up having 4 kids. At this time, they were still living with their parents. I mean, their families lived across the street from one another. It was the more economic thing to do. And so it actually wasn't until 1982 that they would end up moving in together in a single family home just for them and their kids. And the neighborhood that they ended up moving to was a pretty historic neighborhood on the west side, and it was a little bit run down. Not to say that there was anything wrong with the neighborhood by any means. It just was a lower income area. And the only reason that I'm bringing that up is because that does end up becoming relevant later in the story. At this point, Ariel and Grimilda had been married for years. I mean, they had 4 kids. That takes some time, right? And the entirety of their marriage, he had never, according to her and to both of their families, exhibited any overt signs of abuse. And I think that a large reason why that could be is probably just because they didn't have their own home. He was being watched by her family and his family at essentially all times, and a lot of abusers will claim privately that they have a hard time controlling themselves and they have anger issues and this and that, but it's always interesting to me how those people who are so abusive that they can't control themselves rarely lash out at work or in other environments where they need to save face in order to maintain professionalism. And this seems like one of those situations, because once they moved into their own home, Ariel became extremely abusive, essentially overnight. And I have a list of Grimilda's injuries that she accumulated within just I believe the first year of them living together. He broke her nose, both of her arms, her ribs, her skull, which caused a blood clot in her brain, which would develop into a tumor, which would result in her direct death in 2012. There's going to be a reoccurring trend in this case, you'll see, because she wasn't the only person that Ariel was abusing. He was also abusing their 4 children. And Grimilda reported him for domestic violence, not only against her, but against their children. And when she pressed charges, he was seen in front of a grand jury, and they decided that there was not enough evidence here. And so he just got to walk. He just got to move on with his life as normal, even though he had done all of that damage to her. I mean, reasonably, I don't understand how somebody can have their skull, their nose, both their arms, and several of their ribs broken in 1 year without it being a car accident of some sort and you don't see the writing on the wall, but that will just be the beginning. She would leave him. She ended up leaving him in 1996, which is good for her. And she actually also was granted full custody when she did this. And after this, that's the most dangerous time when you're leaving an abusive relationship. The abuse doesn't just stop. It actually usually ramps up, at least for a while. And so during this time, he continued to harass her, abuse her, stalk her, and she continuously filed complaints about this. He was continuously arrested, and then he would just get released every single time. He would just end up getting released. In 2005, she filed charges for child abduction of their own children and for abuse against her. And for this, she was finally granted a temporary restraining order, but they just ended up lifting it. Super quickly, they ended up lifting it. And it's believed that because he constantly was getting away with everything, he became emboldened. He started to feel like nothing was ever going to stick, so why not just ramp up the bad behavior? And as a result, in 2002, the kidnappings began. Before we move forward, I mean, I think I alluded to this earlier when I was talking about the movies, but this case is pretty extreme. It is a very well-known case, but I'm not sure if everybody knows the intimate details. And so if you are not prepared to hear about infant loss, unwanted pregnancy, unwanted abortions, SA, R word, extreme physical violence, mental torture, like the list goes on and on. It's gonna be pretty brutal. So if you're not okay with hearing about that, then that is completely fine, and I'll just see you next time. So first, we're gonna start with Michelle Knight. Michelle Knight's story I found to be just incredibly affecting. She was the oldest of all of the girls, and the time in which this happened, it was just the worst timing possible. A lot of people know about pathos, ethos, logos. When you're in school, you learn about, like, you know, pathos, that's the emotional appeal, right? Ethos, you're establishing that you know what you're talking about. Logos, you're arguing with logic. But a lot of people don't know about kairos. And kairos is the art of timing, specifically the art of good timing. This is a situation wherein it's very anti-kairos. It is the worst timing possible for Michelle Knight, because Michelle had had a really difficult upbringing in many ways. Born April 23rd, 1981, when she was a little girl, like kindergarten, she really wanted to be a firefighter. And when she got older, she decided that she wanted to be a vet. It's a little bit of a reoccurring theme here. Michelle was somebody who liked to fantasize about swooping in and helping. She wanted to be a little heroic. She had this innate desire to save. Her home life wasn't good. Her and her mom had a very tumultuous relationship. In school, she was really ruthlessly bullied. Everybody made fun of her for being short. They called her Shorty. I know that that doesn't sound like that mean of a nickname, but if you've ever been bullied, it can be like the dumbest nickname ever. It's just like the constant, like, harassment. It really beats you down, and especially if you have a difficult home life on top of that, you become so exhausted. You just never get a break. You don't get to relax when you're at home. You don't get to relax when you're at school. You essentially have no soft place to land. You have no safe space to decompress. And that's the case for Michelle. And if all of that wasn't bad enough, when Michelle was young, she was actually assaulted. And shortly after that assault, she ended up becoming a teen mom. I didn't get the impression from what I was reading and what I watched that the pregnancy was a result of the assault, but it could very well have been a situation where the assault resulted in hypersexuality. That's a really common reaction that people have when they experience an assault, and maybe that hypersexuality led to the pregnancy, and so therefore there's an indirect link there, but I just want to be clear that I didn't see any sort of direct link there, but correct me if I'm wrong. Because of becoming a mother at just 17 years old, she ended up having to drop out of high school. And because she dropped out of high school, she was really struggling to work. She was really struggling to deal with her home life with her mom. Having a baby thrown into the mix didn't exactly mend that relationship either. It just added more strain. And so by the time that her son Joey was 2 years old, he was actually taken into foster care. And from what I could glean about why he ended up being in foster care, Joey had an injury, and it's believed that either the grandmother, Michelle's mom, or some sort of boyfriend, either her mom's boyfriend or Michelle's boyfriend, had hurt Joey, but it wasn't indicated that Michelle had been the one to hurt Joey. Michelle was absolutely devastated when this happened. She was literally just completely gutted, as any mother would be, to have her son taken from her. And especially because it's like, it seems like Michelle could never catch a break, dude. It seems like she was just fighting this uphill battle constantly, and she was just trying to, like, gain a little bit of ground, and every time that she felt like she was getting used to her new normal, something else would happen. And so she was going to all of her appointments with social services to do whatever she could do to regain custody of her son. And she was on her way to one of these appointments when she unfortunately got lost. I mean, this is before everybody has an iPhone. It's just 2002. You could Google Maps it, print it out, try and walk there. I don't think that Michelle had a car. And so when she was on her way to this appointment, which you can't show up late to a social services appointment when you're trying to get custody of your son back. It's a bad look. Looks like you're not taking it seriously. So she was freaking out. She needed to get there on time if she was going to have any chance of getting Joey back anytime soon. And she was getting increasingly frustrated because she didn't know where she was going, and she was honestly on the verge of having a panic attack because she was going to be late to this appointment. And then all of a sudden, like a knight in shining armor, she sees her friend's dad, Ariel. She's seeing him. She's like, oh my God, I can ask this guy for a favor. Like, I know his daughter. We were in class together. We were friends. Like, maybe he can drive me there. Maybe he knows where to go. Like, at the very least, like, a car is going to be faster than what I'm doing now. And so because of this, when she saw him and he offered to drive her, of course she's going to say yes. But not only that, he was like, I know exactly where it is. Actually, you're not only going to be on time, you're probably going to be early. It's only about like a 5-minute drive, but it's a really long walk. So if you kept walking, yeah, you would have been super late, and that would be if you even knew where you were going. But since we're driving, you know, you're going to be really early, which actually gives me an idea. You know, my dog just had puppies, and since we've got a lot of time to spare, I live right around the corner. You know, do you think that maybe your son wants a puppy? I mean, that could look good for social services, like you're really trying to make an effort to make a nice home for him. And Michelle at first is like, oh man, like he would love that, but like I can't risk being late. I'd rather just get there early, you know, maybe we'll revisit the puppy idea after. Then Ariel pushes a little bit, like not in a scary way, still being friendly. He's like, listen, it's right around the corner, like you're still gonna be like 15 minutes early by the time that we've gone, picked up the dog, and driven all the way back. I mean, you don't have to worry about being late at all, especially now that I'm driving you. So Michelle thinks about it for a second, and then she agrees. She's like, you know what? Actually, like, my son probably would love that, and, you know, I'm sure he's, like, devastated. She said that he was a really sensitive kid, and so, of course, being, like, uprooted from his home, that's a big adjustment for anybody. So she's probably thinking to herself, like, you know what, maybe this will sort of like ease the transition, give him something at the very least to look forward to. So like he knows, like, hey, I'm going to get you back, you're going to come home, and then when you come home, you'll have a new puppy. And so he'll have something to hold on to, something to focus on other than like being in foster care. So Ariel drives Michelle to his house. They pull up. She sees the dog in the backyard. She's like, oh, where's the puppies? And he's like, oh, well, the puppies are, you know, they're upstairs in one of the bedrooms. You know, even mom needs a break sometimes. And she's like, oh, okay. So she goes upstairs and she walks into one of the 2 bedrooms up there. And then Ariel immediately locks her in the room. And not only did he lock her in the room, but she would end up being locked inside that house for 11 years. If that wasn't bad enough, the first thing that he did once he locked her into the room is he tied her up, he bound her hands and feet, he went through her stuff, pulled out a photo of her son. Again, this is before you have a phone. You know, Michelle only had like one printout photo of her son on hand in her wallet. That's it. And he holds up the photo of her son and he rips it up in front of her face and tells her, you know, like, you're not going to see your son for a long time. Michelle's panicking. She's thinking to herself, you know, even if I get out of here, you know, I'm going to be so late to this meeting and I might lose my son. And so she's not even, of course, it's not even like occurring to her that like she could be stuck in that house forever. She is worried. She knows she's in danger, but she's also thinking like, you know, I know this guy, like I know his daughter, like how could he do this to me? After he bound her hands and feet, he left her to starve for 3 days. Her mother actually reported her missing the next day, but the police just believed that she was probably a runaway. I mean, even though she was 21 years of age at this time, they could see on her paperwork that her son was in the system, that things hadn't been exactly going well, that she was a teen mom. She didn't have a high school diploma, she didn't have a GED, and their takeaway was essentially that, this was all probably just too much for Michelle, and maybe she bailed. And her mom, despite the fact that they had a dysfunctional relationship, to her credit, her mom was like, no, Michelle would never run away, let alone without Joey, let alone when she's supposed to be at this appointment to get Joey back. She would never, ever, ever risk something like that. But the police, they weren't that invested. They weren't really buying it. They didn't think it was that high priority of a case. In fact, they lacked such urgency about this that just 15 months after she was reported missing, she was removed from the missing persons portal. From the moment that Michelle Knight went missing, there was next to no effort to locate her. People just thought that she was a lost cause. She just ended up slipping through the cracks of the system. And her son Joey ended up being adopted out because of that. For 11 years, her son believed that his mother just ran out on him, didn't want him, didn't care that he had been taken away and was in foster care. When the reality was that Michelle was fighting the worst circumstances imaginable, essentially living under the same conditions as like a POW does. Like, I'll get into that in more detail, but like, it would be bad enough for her to be kidnapped and in a place where she has no control and can't escape, but like the things that Ariel was doing to her are honestly like indescribable. But let's jump forward a year to 2003. On April 24th of 2003 to be exact. This brings us to Amanda Berry. That name might sound familiar. She is the most famous name in association with this case. Born April 27th, 1986, she was just 17 years of age at this time. She was working at a Burger King. She was helping her family out, trying to bring some extra income. And actually, she almost called out of work that day because it was the day before her birthday. So she was thinking like, maybe I should just give myself a break, not going to work. And then she ended up thinking better of it. She was like, no, like I'll regret later. Like I need the hours. And it's not actually my birthday today. It's the day before my birthday. So I guess I'll just go. She went to work. Her shift was normal. After her shift, she ended up calling her sister because none of her coworkers could give her a ride home. And she was having a hard time finding somebody who could. She had already gone through all of her friends, asked everybody. Her sister was like, oh man, that sucks. For whatever reason, her sister couldn't give her a ride home. And so she told her, like, I think I'm probably just going to end up having to walk. And it's at this time that she was making this phone call that she actually saw a little bit off in the distance a van with a man and a girl that she recognized from school. And in that moment, she sort of contemplated to herself, like, oh, like, I think I know her. Like, should I ask them for a ride? And then she ended up dismissing the idea. But later, that same van ended up looping back around, only the girl wasn't in the car anymore. It was just the man. And he actually ended up offering her a ride because he noticed that she was walking home. Amanda had actually gone to middle school with Ariel's daughter. And so because of that, she recognized him once she got a better look. She was like, oh yeah, like that's her dad. Yeah, like I know him. I'd seen him at some like school events and picking her up and stuff like that. Like, I'm sure that's safe. And so while they were driving, Amanda and Ariel were talking about that. And he actually was like, hey, my daughter, I was just over here. I just dropped her off at home. Like, do you want to go to our house and like say hi to her before I drop you at yours? I mean, I live around the corner. It's really no problem. I don't know how long it's been since you girls have seen each other. I mean, she'd probably be excited. And so Amanda thought, like, she had time and it's her birthday tomorrow. Her shift just ended. Like, it could be nice to, like, see an old friend for a second. And so she was like, you know what? Yeah, like, sure, why not? When they first walked into the house, Ariel walked in first. And then he turned around and he told Amanda, like, oh, I think my daughter's in the shower. Just, like, give her a couple minutes. And at this point, Amanda actually sees Michelle. Michelle is not Ariel's daughter. Refresher, Michelle is the first girl that he kidnapped. He sees her like lying in a bedroom and she's thinking to herself like, that's a little weird. Like, that girl looks pretty young to be dating this guy. Like, and if she's not, like, I don't know why else she would be here. Like, She doesn't look related to them. Ariel then shoves Amanda into a room, locks her inside, and immediately R-words her in the dark. He then taped her wrists and legs and then also secured a belt around her legs as well. He then brought her down to the basement and he chained her to a pole and put a helmet on her head. He then left her in the dark with the TV on, just chained to the pole. And Amanda was screaming bloody murder this entire time, and just nobody responded to her screams. And in this neighborhood, I mean, these houses are pretty close to each other. It's like a typical urban neighborhood where there's like, you know, just like a little sidewalk alley in between houses, or like a driveway in between houses. Or the house I lived in my last neighborhood was set up pretty much exactly like this. Like any old historical neighborhood in the Midwest is pretty much set up like this, where they have all of the houses pretty close together. You'll have like an alley or sometimes a driveway that goes down, and you have a detached garage at the back. It was set up pretty much exactly like that. So it's not like this is like a small town in Texas where there's like miles between houses or something like that. I mean, at most 20 feet. At most. And no one could hear her scream. I mean, from the pictures of his house specifically, I would say that it's like a cool 6 feet on either side. But no one could hear her. Her mom reported her missing right away because now she's not shown up and it's her birthday. MBI considered her a runaway right away because of her age. Her mom and her sister were like, dude, she wouldn't run away on her birthday. Who the hell does that? And just a week after Amanda went missing, an anonymous man, presumably Ariel, called her mom and told her that he had Amanda and that she would be returned eventually. Only this made her an official missing person. Once this development happened, this phone call situation happened, then they considered her to be a missing person. Then they started actually actively looking for her. Her mom continued to do whatever she could to try and assist in the investigation, but unfortunately she would not live to ever see Amanda return home because she ended up dying in 2006 of heart failure. And I have to assume that like the stress of this entire situation played a major role in that. I feel like this woman literally died of a broken heart. Maybe I'm projecting onto the situation, but it's so unjust to me that she never like knew what happened to Amanda. And all of us do. It seems unfair. Now we're going to move on to the final kidnapped girl. The third girl of the three. Georgina DeJesus. Gina is the youngest by far out of all of the girls. She was only 14 years old. And she was incredibly close, some have said best, friends with Ariel's daughter. And if that wasn't bad enough, Gina's dad, Felix, was best friends with Ariel. On April 2nd, Arlene, who's Ariel's daughter, and Gina had a sleepover planned. Gina's mom ended up saying for an unknown reason that she couldn't go. She banned her. Presumably, it had something to do with Ariel because there had been a lot of rumors about like the divorce and the DV stuff. So it seems like that was why, because she didn't just say she couldn't go. She was like, no sleepovers for you guys. And Ariel and Felix didn't have a falling out. Gina and Arlene obviously didn't have a falling out. So I can't see any other reason why that would suddenly become a rule. Because of this, Arlene was the last person that Gina had seen before she went missing, because they were discussing this at the end of the day at school. Arlene's not upset. She was just literally being informed by Gina that she couldn't sleep over anymore. Gina's mom would actually give her bus fare every day so that she could get home, but Gina would pocket the money, which is like, this is a very classic teenager move. Gina would pocket the money so that she could buy snacks throughout the day, and then she would walk the 40 blocks home. The problem is that the walk home was a little treacherous, especially for a 14-year-old girl. It mainly consisted of commercial areas, which is like fine, but there were several different points at which she would have to cross through these really rundown areas that were known red light districts. And like in that situation, like anybody who's on the corner is not really who you would have to worry about. It's more so the people in the cars driving up, right? And one said car, ended up being Ariel. He pulled up to Gina and he sort of frantically asked her if she had seen Arlene recently. And Gina was like, well, I mean, I saw her before I left school. Like, what's wrong? And Ariel's like, oh, she's missing. Like, I need you to help me find her. For anybody who's young and impressionable and watching this, no adult is ever going to need help finding anyone or anything from you, a minor. That is the job of other adults. If there's an adult who has lost like a puppy or a kitten, for an example, they have no reason to go up to like a 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14-year-old and ask for help instead of calling whatever police department or like pet department they need to call, or getting other adults to rally around them. And if there's a missing person, there's no reason why Gina would be the first person that is in the search party, where it's just Ariel and Gina. That's not the appropriate order of things. First thing Ariel should have done is called the police if this story were true, and then Gina could talk to the police, tell them what she knows, join a public search party. There is no reason why an adult needs a teenager sidekick to help them go on like a quest to find someone or something. So just know that is like a real reoccurring issue in a lot of these cases. So Gina agreed to look for Arlene, assuming that Ariel would take her home afterwards, since she was walking home when he picked her up. But instead, Ariel ended up taking her to his home, where he touched her inappropriately. At this point, Gina pushes back. She asks him, like, hey, what are you doing? Like, you could go to jail for this. And he's apologetic. He's like, oh, sorry, like, I don't know what came over me. She's like, can you take me home? And he tells her, like, yeah, you can go home. And then he promptly locks her in the basement. The first thing her parents tried to do was put out an Amber Alert for her. And there was no Amber Alert because no one had witnessed the abduction. I guess that's one of their rules, or at least it was in the early 2000s. And her family was very upset about this. But unlike the other two girls, the police actually took Gina's disappearance pretty seriously, pretty immediately. They offered a $20,000 reward for anybody who had any information that could potentially lead to Gina being found. They issued an FBI composite sketch a year after her disappearance. They stayed on her case. They stayed looking for her. And a big contributing factor to why that was is because Gina's family was incredibly persistent. Mind you, again, her father was best friends with Ariel. So Ariel was very aware of the desperation and the sense of urgency and just the sheer trauma that her family was experiencing over her disappearance, because he was witnessing it firsthand. And while Felix would cry to Ariel and talk about how devastated he was about this loss, Ariel knew the whole time where Gina was, and he was the one who was responsible. Like I said, the things that Ariel was doing to these girls is truly horrific, so I'm gonna just read it out in list format. I feel like it's all so visceral that like bullet pointing it should be more than enough. I don't feel like I need to get into real descriptive storytelling here. So these are just some of the things they experienced. Forced sexual contact, locked in a room, anticipating abuse, escape fantasies, chained to the wall, held like prisoners of war, treated like animals, death threats, missing their old lives, kept chained in the basement for years, moved to barricaded rooms upstairs, restrained physically and sexually assaulted daily, inhumane living conditions. Their toilets were just buckets that were rarely changed out. They showered twice a week at most. They got one meal a day. Ariel would play mind games with the girls. He would sometimes intentionally leave the door open, make them think that they had an opportunity for escape, and if they did escape, he would beat them severely for attempting to escape. One of the things that I find especially disturbing is that instead of birthdays, he had them celebrate abduction days. So he made them commemorate yearly the day that he abducted them as a celebration. Like, that's something worth celebrating. They all lived together, but also separate. He had them in their own rooms. Sometimes he would have 2 girls in a room at a time at most, but they were pretty isolated from one another. They didn't get to have any sense of real camaraderie amongst themselves. For example, Michelle was kept with Gina, but she was also the most defiant, so she was often separated from her because she would be experiencing various punishments for her defiance. She would be chained up in the basement, she would be given no food or water, she was frequently assaulted, she was beaten as a form of punishment. And then this next subject is particularly sensitive, but by her estimate, she believes that she was pregnant at least 5 different times as a result of these assaults. And if that wasn't already like horrifying enough, Ariel would actually perform back alley abortions, if you can even call them that, once I describe what he was doing to prevent these pregnancies from coming to term. So he would terminate these pregnancies by doing things like throwing Michelle against a wall repeatedly, or like pushing her down the stairs. And one of his like preferred methods, which is just like so like horrific to me, is he would throw dumbbells at her stomach. Like, pregnancy or no, that would be so incredibly painful. Like, what a cruel thing to do to somebody. I mean, Michelle specifically, like, the abuse that she experienced was so severe that she actually ended up requiring facial reconstruction over a decade later. Meanwhile, Amanda was held in a bedroom upstairs where she was chained to a radiator. And by bedrooms, I mean, that's being somewhat generous, though they are technically bedrooms. They were very small. They were closer to, like, the size of a large closet, especially because these are older, more historical homes. She was repeatedly R-worded. She actually kept count of it in her diary. And of course, she also got pregnant, but unlike Michelle, she was allowed by Ariel to let the baby come to term. The baby was born on Christmas of 2006. By Amanda's own account, looks exactly like Ariel. It was a girl. Amanda can actually be quoted saying, "My baby looks just like him, but I would constantly tell myself, she's mine, she's mine, she's mine." In her spare time, she would teach her daughter how to read, how to write. She tried to be as normal of a parent as one possibly can be when chained to like a radiator held against your will. I really hope that doesn't come off as a joke. I'm being so serious. Like, this is just a terrible situation. She named her daughter Jocelyn, and Jocelyn actually ended up being a distraction for all of the girls because Jocelyn was allowed to run freely through the house. Ariel actually became very fond of Jocelyn, and so he would allow her to go to church with him and leave the house from time to time, play outside in the yard. She was, like I said, allowed to free roam throughout the home. And so this allowed all of the girls to get to interact with her to a certain extent. And she really did end up being something that they could focus on and sort of like pour their energy into. Ariel even, and I don't know what his excuse for this was, but he even brought Jocelyn to have visits with his mom. I don't know if he said that the mother wasn't in the picture or what, but he did do that. And actually, and this is one of the crazier parts to me, Ariel's family would come to the house where these 3 girls were being held, and he would just barricade the doors for like the basement or the bedrooms that these girls were being held in, and the girls didn't scream and they didn't make any noise. And I don't want this to be an opportunity for people to victim blame, because the reason that they did that is they weren't sure how Ariel would react, because this guy's crazy. Like, he's unstable, and they were really worried that if they made noise, I mean, they're still locked up down there, and that they brought this attention to his family, which would be his mother or his kids. They were really concerned that this would just prompt Ariel to go full family annihilator and kill his mother, kill his kids, and then ultimately kill them. So these girls who are experiencing like the worst case scenario in many ways are still having the wherewithal to think outside themselves, to think about the safety of other people. And yes, they are thinking about their own safety as well, because they're still contained in the house. Like, if he kills everybody else, he's going to kill them next. But still, I mean, not everybody would be thinking outside themselves in that situation, and not even like that's a bad thing, just purely because most people would be in a 100% survivalist mindset, and that doesn't always include other people. But it does just sort of speak to like the sort of insane double life that Ariel was leading, because outside
of the home, his life outwardly was still completely normal. He had the same job, he had the same friends, he had like a bustling social life. He was doing everything that he did before he started kidnapping people, and he had never been held accountable for anything in his life ever. So why would it start now? He wasn't held accountable for the domestic violence. He wasn't held accountable for the way that he treats his children either, which is like still domestic violence, but you know what I'm saying. And so, why is he going to get caught? It's been like almost a decade now that he's had 3 girls in his house, and no one's looking for anyone except for Gina. And he's got a great thumb on the pulse of like how the Gina case is going because he's best friends with her dad. And Gina, by the way, was his favorite, which is even more disturbing because she is by far the youngest of the girls. And actually, to speak to that really quickly, when he kidnapped Michelle, who was 21 at the time, he believed that she was just 15 by the looks of her, and he was actually disappointed to learn that she was 21 years old. But after Gina was taken, he didn't assault her for a month. Not a testimony to how great Ariel is, but it does give us some sort of insight into how he views her, like the innocence that he believes that she has. I don't think that that's him respecting that. I think that that's sort of him savoring that. So I think it's actually more disgusting than it might seem on the surface level. It's also even more disturbing that she was best friends with his daughter. They're the same age, and he's doing all of this. If all of this wasn't crazy enough, Ariel's day job was around kids. He worked as a school bus driver till 2012, and he was actually fired in 2012 for things that sort of are indicative of him being a just dirtbag anyway. I mean, like, the things that he was doing on paper, they just signified like negligence as far as the kids were concerned, and like poor judgment, which like tracks for Ariel. In addition to all of that, like, his house actually was being foreclosed on because he had failed to pay property taxes for 3 years. So a lot of things were closing in on Ariel at this time, and he only had so much time to figure it out. On May 6th, 2013, Jocelyn, the little girl who was born from Amanda and Ariel due to assault, she was 6 years old. Ariel had gone out to run some errands, and Jocelyn didn't know that. All she knew is that she couldn't find him in the house. And so she got worried, as many 6-year-olds would, and she went to her mom and told her that she couldn't find her dad anywhere. I'm going to read a direct quote from Amanda. "My heart immediately started pounding. Should I chance it? If I'm going to do it, I need to do it now." Not only was Amanda's door left unlocked, but the crucial mistake that Ariel made was he had 2 doors at the front door. He had his normal door with like a storm door, but then he had a door behind it that was hooked up to an alarm that would set off if any of the girls tried to escape, and he left the alarm door open. So she didn't have to bypass that. It was already open. Now, the storm door was still closed, and it was locked with a padlock. So Ariel hadn't just left the entire house unlocked. He had remembered to lock one thing, but because it was with a padlock, she could jam it open just enough to force her arm out of the storm door and scream out to neighbors across the street. And at this point, one of the neighbors, Charles Ramsey, immediately ran up and he broke down the door. You should look up interviews of Charles Ramsey after this because he was genuinely so shocked. And he was living right there and he never heard anybody scream. So when the girls say like they would scream and no one would respond, I truly do believe that the neighbors were completely unaware of this situation. If you see the way that Charles reacts, I don't think this is a situation of people just being like, oh, I don't know what's going on over there, but I'm going to mind my business. I really think no one had any idea that anything was going on at all. Charles broke down the door and he immediately called 911. And Amanda can be heard on the line saying, "I've been kidnapped. I've been missing for 10 years, but I'm free now." And then she begged dispatch to send more police to go get the other girls out of the house. Cleveland PD then arrived on the scene and they found Michelle and Gina locked in 2 rooms upstairs. At this time, Michelle can be quoted saying, "The first time I was actually able to sit outside and feel the sun, it was so warm, so bright. It was like God was shining a big light on me." Because you have to remember, like, when I say that they were locked inside this house, like they were locked inside this house. There's not like windows. He's got everything boarded up. If they were able to look outside the window, people would be able to look inside the window and see them. So they were just kept in relative darkness for a decade plus. Luckily, the same day that the girls were freed, Ariel was finally arrested. On May 8th, 2014, he was charged with 4 counts of kidnapping, 3 counts of R-word, and it's 10 years to life per charge in Ohio. On June 7th, a grand jury indicted him on 329 total counts. So all of those charges that Ariel had been dodging his whole life, all that bad stuff he had done, is coming back to bite tenfold. Ariel then, in a bold and brash move, pleaded not guilty, and then asked that there not be a public trial so that he can spare the girls extra trauma. Where was that energy before? Despite this, on July 3rd, he was deemed mentally competent and began his pretrial hearings. DNA confirmed that he was Jocelyn's father. He asked for visitation, and he was rightfully denied. On July 12th, a grand jury brought a total of 977 counts. 512 of those counts were related to kidnapping, 446 of R-word, 7 of gross sexual imposition, 6 of felonious assault, 3 of child endangerment, 2 of aggravated murder, and 1 of possession of criminal tools. On July 26, he pled guilty to 936 of the 977 charges brought against him. This was a part of a plea bargain for consecutive sentences, plus 1,000 years, no parole. He forfeited the right to appeal or the right to profit off of this case and his story, which I think should just be a pillar of almost all cases like this, and it is one thing that leaves a lot of people with a bad taste in their mouth when it comes to the true crime community, because there are not only criminals who enjoy the notoriety, but they also quite literally profit off of the story. And so he forgoes the right for that. They could make 1 million movies, he could write 1 million books, he's not going to see a dime. His home was also demolished after this, which I think is great. And during the trial, he was just unsurprisingly like terrible, because he essentially came in, was like, oh, I'm remorseful, but he was also had this really defiant tone throughout, and he tried to claim that there were 4 victims in this case and that they were all victims of the same thing, that being his sex addiction. He was claiming that the girls and he were in equal parts victims to his sex addiction, that he wasn't in control of it, and therefore he was victimized by it as well, and they were all in this together, which is just truly frustrating. He also claimed that his crime sounded worse on paper, and that all of the girls were willing participants in any of the sexual contact. He was sentenced on August 1st, 2013, essentially to rot alone, which is great. Punishment fits the crime, I say. But just a month and a day later, he would be found hung in his cell. He hung himself in front of a shrine of his family as well as a Bible. They actually went through his diary, and you can see from his diary entries that he was getting increasingly frustrated, again, over the course of just a month, saying that he resented the fact that he was locked up, that he didn't have any autonomy, that he couldn't go anywhere. I mean, it's all very ironic stuff where it's like, you have to wonder, like, is he hearing himself? And I feel like the answer is no. And on top of the fact that he was upset that he was locked up, he was upset that he was being constantly harassed by the other inmates, as if he wasn't quite literally abusing 3 girls for like a decade straight, psychologically, physically, and sexually, all day, every day. But he's upset that he's getting harassed by inmates for 1 month. After all of this, these girls did what all Brazilian women do, and they just rebuilt their lives. You know, they were finally free, and they weren't going to like waste that opportunity to actually live life. I mean, of course, they have got to have such strong, complex PTSD. I'm sure they're in a lot of therapy, and they have a lot of things that they're going to have to process for the rest of their lives. Their lives are forever changed. But they did get back out there and do whatever they could to try and find some semblance of normalcy. Michelle Knight actually wrote a New York Times bestseller, and of course it was about her experience, and it was called Finding Me. She then changed her name, presumably just because she doesn't want to be in the spotlight, and she got married, and then she decided that she was going to try to do everything that she could do to reconnect with Joey, because again, Joey was adopted out because she wasn't there for that meeting, and then she wasn't there ever again for 11 years. And so he had been adopted by another family at this point. 5 years after her rescue, she then wrote another book called Life After Darkness, which was also a huge hit. Amanda Berry and Georgina DeJesus actually wrote a bestseller as well together. They were co-authors. It was called Hope, a memoir of survival in Cleveland. They also both received honorary high school diplomas. February of 2017, Amanda actually joined Fox 8 in Cleveland, and her job is to highlight missing persons. Whereas Gina actually volunteers for the Amber Alert Committee, because if you recall, she was not issued an Amber Alert because of how she went missing. And that's pretty much all the information that we have on everybody. That's as up to date as it gets. I mean, they all want to live relatively private lives. They were just sort of thrust into the spotlight because of how crazy this case is. But 2017 is the most recent update. I mean, I'm sure you can find other updates as well, but in terms of like notable life events. Hello, Neko. She's been attacking me. But anyway, if you guys liked this video, please literally like it. Or consider literally liking it. At least like it for Neko. If you don't like for Neko, you're not real. If you don't like for Neko, you're a hater. How could you not like for Neko? Listen to her purr. She likes you, so you should like her and this video. Okay, I'm done harassing you guys. But also, if you haven't subscribed, think about it. You know, it's up to you. Personal choice. All right. Thank you guys for being patient with me. I suck at keeping the upload schedule. I'll just say it. I've been having a lot of medical problems and stuff, but I hope that one day I do truly post every single Saturday. That's my dream. I'm going to try and get there. Maybe let me know if you want Neko to come back or if she was too distracting. She purrs really loud, so I have no idea how that's going to sound when I watch this back. But thank you, and I hope you guys have a nice night. All right, bye!